Okay, perfect. Hey, everybody. We're just about done with the panels for this afternoon. We got a couple more remaining on some interesting topics, and this is a whole overarching theme of how do we think about what happens when a lot of users are in this ecosystem. So we had a topic on how do we get the first million users in, and the next million. What happens when money and capital 3.0 comes in? And with that, obviously, the nature of what it means to be an organization and work should also change. So, with that in mind, I'd like to invite John Poller from Opolis, Kevin Nowacki from Gitcoin, Derek Razzo from Purpose Ventures, Nathan Schneider from University of Colorado, and Natalia from DAOstack to stage. And they'll be talking about the future of work and organizing systems. And the panel will be moderated by Evan Van Ness from The Week in Ethereum. Please welcome them on stage.
Is this the part where I start with a BitConnect reference? Okay, never mind. Bad joke. All right, we are the Future of Work panel. Let's really just start with our very quick 15-second intro. Go down the line. Who are you and what organization do you work for?
I'm Natalia, and I work with DAOstack, so building an operating system for DAOs.
I'm Nathan Schneider. I teach in media studies at CU Boulder, and I work in developing cooperative and other shared ownership business models, ownership structures for the online economy.
Cool. I'm Derek Razzo. I'm with Purpose, and we're building the tools for organizations to institute alternative ownership and financing structures that support their long-term mission.
Hello, my name is Kevin Nowacki. I am a founder of Gitcoin, whose mission is to grow and sustain open source software. We offer a product that allows you to earn crypto coins in exchange for your work on open source software.
And I'm John Paller. I'm the founder of Opolis, and we're essentially moving a legal and technological framework from corporations centricity to network centricity, so that individuals can have more control and ownership over their employment, not only functionally but legally.
So let's just start off with a really broad question that you can answer however you want, depending on your organization, and we can go in whatever order. And that's really just what are the biggest opportunities that you see in front of you for the future of work?
The biggest?
I mean,
It's
yeah,
pretty big.
it's big. Which one are you going for?
Personally, I think we spend a lot of time in the blockchain space talking about the technological components of future of organizing systems. I don't think we talk enough about, excuse me, my voice is totally shot. I'm sure you can imagine I've been speaking a little bit this weekend. The legal framework of employment is equally as important, but we don't talk about it. We sort of act like it's just gonna abstract away and we don't have to worry about oh, the legal stuff, it'll just be fine. But the truth is, the way that we've architected the framework of employment, not just from the incorporation level, but also legislation, regulation, and any sort of alphabet soup type of thing that you have to comply with. In order to get it right, that framework also has to be well architected to create the balance with the technology. So I think that there's a huge opportunity to see a new advent of, it's kind of like thinking about digital assets or cryptocurrencies as a new asset class. I think that DAOs and the kinds of co-op frameworks that I think are going to come out of the conversation are probably the biggest influence in the next 15 to 20 years, in my opinion.
I hope the future of work involves less work. The one thing that's striking me, I've been on a lot of panels about the future of work funded by foundations who are spewing off the fumes of capital that they own that is producing money that they're not working for. And then they ask about what is the future of work for all those people who have to actually work for money. And that's why I'm really interested in the question of ownership and capital ownership, because we have the means. We have an economy that already enables lots of not nearly enough, a small amount of people to not need to work. There were visions in the past that when technology advanced, working hours would decline. There's evidence that working hours have actually increased. And so I think we need to have that conversation about what kinds of structures in our society we need to change, what kinds of tools we need to be adopting to ensure that we all can much more broadly reap the benefits of that value and have less anxiety about what the future of work is and start talking about the future of life.
I totally agree with that. And I also think of not only on what structures we're going to use and build, but also how we build them and how we're able to incorporate, not only like looking back and all the different attempts that we've already made in the past, and seeing those patterns of human behavior and of the effects of our environments and so on, and no matter what kind of technologies we build, we're still going to face a lot of similar challenges. And I hope we look more deeply into that and also in how to make it less imbalanced, because we're here questioning these things while like most of the population in the world has no idea of what it is and has no idea of like all the different options that it involves. So
I agree. I think that we've gone through a couple tidal shifts in terms of how corporations are organized and labor is organized and capital is organized to support those corporate missions. And I think that the reason there is all these people in this massive building talking about Ethereum and blockchain and all these technological advancements is because we're in the process of seeing a shift from firm-based economic system to network-based economic system. And obviously, we know what this looks like to some degree. Airbnb is, as the moniker goes, it's the largest real estate company that owns no real estate, or largest hotel company that owns no hotels. WeWork is the same for real estate. These are networked firms, but they're structured in the same way that, in a similar and almost identical way to the East India Company. So while the way that we've organized labor has massively changed, the way that we've actually organized the corporate structures that distribute the value of that labor, that actually determine how how the massive resources of that corporation are distributed and governed, has not really changed. And so I think that as we make this shift into the network outcompeting the firm, there's a whole bunch of massive questions about how do we actually govern those networks, how do we own those networks together, how do we distribute the value that those networks create. And I think the people who are working in networks, they're not necessarily always doing it because it's a purely financial play for them. I think the most powerful networks are those that inculcate a sense of purpose. So the future of work that I'm looking forward to and trying to build, and I think everybody on this panel is also trying to build, is purpose-driven networks. And we can have a deeper conversation about like how to structure that and what the tools you need and what the capital structures you need are for that. But I think that you first have to agree that that's actually where we want to go to before you can answer any of those other technical, tactical questions.
Yeah, I would agree that we're in the middle of a seismic shift in the way labor is organized, and I like to think of it in the context of epochs of human history. So basically, in the agricultural age, a lot of the labor force was deployed on farms. To your point, in the industrial age, was built around firms and people moving to cities. And one of the theories that I've been noodling on is that we're in the middle of a shift, a seismic shift, to use your words, from an industrial age to an information age. And so firms to networks, I guess, are the organizing principle of the information age. And I hesitate to say things in broad strokes about the future of work because I just have such a narrow sliver of visibility on it being a software engineer from the bubble of Boulder, Colorado. But within the constraints of that bubble, I'm seeing remote work being on an uptrend. I'm seeing work on open source systems being an uptrend. I'm particularly excited about the trends in blockchain of nested capitalism. So basically, like the transfer of values within a corporation between teams, just like within a cell. There's sort of like an economy of value that happens within a cell or a multicellular organism. I'm excited about data as labor, which was an idea that Glenn Weil put forward in his liberal radical markets book. And one of the things that I think would be really key for making all this stuff mesh together is ownership, self-sovereign ownership of your own employment and of your own reputation. So moving from the LinkedIn model where you are the product and you're being sold to recruiters or advertisers to a more like 3box or Gitcoin kudos type model where you're owning your own reputation, your professional resume, and can transport that from site to site and manage who can have access to that information. I think that all these things are going to change the way that we work within software development and open source, but I would not speak so confidently about the broader economy because it's just a huge ecosystem, and I'm not sure that those things that apply in my Boulder blockchain bubble apply to the rest of the economy.
So I heard a lot of more or less agreement about DAOs and Ethereum being a way to reorganize, re-architect organizing systems, but also a lot of concern about the future. So my question is, on an individual level, what are you and your organizations doing, and what experiments are you running to make sure that you avoid dystopia? Obviously something that we all want to avoid, and I think everybody expressed concern about that as well.
Yeah. I'll take that one. So I guess I'll start by saying that I disagree with the premise of the question, and I'm actually bearish on DAOs. I think that we're spending. John said this to me the other day, and I hope you don't mind me repeating it. That a lot of DAOs I feel like are built for this like fantastical Blade Runner future that we don't live in, and they're too complex and they're hard to use.
Buck Rogers.
What's
Can
that?
Buck Rogers.
Buck Rogers
I
future.
think I would say like that when you have a hammer, you think everything is a nail. You know, and, like we see a lot of that happening with DAOs.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Hey, cool. Let's do this.
And-
What are we doing?
And so the trend that I want to see before we figure out the dystopia question, I want to figure out what the minimum viable DAO is. What's the minimum viable tool that can actually be the rails of an organization? And I will stand here and proudly say at this blockchain Ethereum conference that Gitcoin is hella centralized, and we get a lot of shit done because we're really centralized. And when DAOstack figures out how to give me a DAO in a box that I can DAOize Gitcoin, then I'll do it. But I just feel like the tech isn't there yet, and I'm bearish on DAOs until we find a minimum viable DAO.
Can the tech get there?
Sorry, this sounds bad, and I didn't hear that. What?
Can the tech get there?
Yes.
No.
This
I
is
mean-
great. I like debates.
No, I mean the idea of decentralizing everything is a lie. It's not going to happen. It doesn't conceptually make sense. Decentralization is something that can happen in part of a system, but you've seen it happen over and over. Think of your favorite decentralized project, and then think of the disappointing centralization that occurred in it somewhere down the line that you didn't expect because you were so fixated on the decentralization that you were trying to make occur, right? Decentralization is one aspect of any system. There are going to be points of centralization that arise, and we shouldn't be afraid of that. This stuff is built into the technology. Even when you're talking about any protocol, is in some sense highly centralized. Ethereum is highly centralized in one sense, right? Vitalik Buterin talks about this, about, it's a single ledger. That's an incredible point of centralization. And one thing that's been, I think, disappointing to me from when I first, started hanging out with people who were building the earliest versions of Ethereum in early 2014 is I thought, wow, this is going to be the technology for building the new systems of accountable democracy, right? This is a tool that we can use to really hack out, voice and participation, and explore all kinds of new ways of being heard and being efficient and effective in that by being so. And instead, people kind of turned to markets. People got all excited about kind of replicating the pre-depression stock market, right? Now I think we're in a moment of opportunity where I see actually patterns forming where people are starting to develop, maybe secretly, kind of embarrassed about it a little bit, models of governance that involve some kind of accountable centralization, that use these tools to actually develop the new, the next phases of democracy that, in some respects aren't so different from the older phases of democracy. But I think we can only begin to do that when we get over the idea that that decentralizing everything is, a rational aspiration.
So what specifically do you want to see?
Sorry?
What specifically do you want to see?
Do I want to see?
Yeah, well, you said you wanted to see like systems put in place around radical democracy and not markets. So I'm curious about examples around that.
Structures that are able to hear the voices of participants more finely, minutely, attentively than we've been able to do in previous systems. People, we're working in political systems with forms of democracy that are a few hundred years old. We have the opportunity to build, and they created tremendous efficiencies over authoritarian systems. We're in a moment where we can build accountable democratic structures to manage these tools. For instance, right now we're relying in a lot of these networks on benevolent dictators for life guiding communities. We're going back to authoritarianism over these markets because we're not building in the structures that can govern these networks appropriately, accountably, in ways where participants really have voice.
Yeah, and I would just dovetail on what you're saying by adding that I think that markets as coordinating mechanisms are a cop-out in most cases. I think that there can be situations where markets as a coordinating mechanism make sense, but I think that specifically when you start talking about complex ideas like that require more project management, more coordination, more togetherness and governance, I just think that history tells us that a market is not necessarily your best bet when it comes to coordinating that type of activity. That being said, there's a place for markets as a coordinating mechanism. There's place for decentralization, but I totally agree with what you're saying that one of my contentions or one of my concerns about going towards the crypto dystopia maybe is that we rely too heavily, not just on markets, but on the entire mindset that got us to where we are. Like a lot of this idea that we're going to have a transparent market coordinating all of the economic activity that's going to lead to everybody's needs being met, it doesn't play out that way without really solid governance. We know that. We've seen it. We're in the process of seeing an extremely difficult experiment go down in the U.S. Not to say that it's a fully transparent market, but I just don't think that. I think that we have to be clear about what the goals are rather than be fixed on the means.
I'd like to hear what the DAO Stack representative has to say.
I agree with Nathan in the sense that decentralization is not everything. And we can even see it in our own experiments at DAOStack. So we create, we went through an ICO, we started creating this operating system for decentralized organizations, maybe like starting 4 years ago. And as soon as we were done with the ICO, we're like, all right, we want to do this a little differently. We want our community to take part on the development of the project with us and help us decide how to use these funds that we got. So we started a little alpha experiment called Genesis Alpha, and throughout that process, we had a lot of different opinions around what would be the importance of centralization and of what we call like the soft skills or soft governance in that process. And now, 6 months later, we can see a huge value in those skills and in indeed having some centralized structures that facilitate all the complexities that are going on in the systems, and how by the end of the day we're still humans trying to figure it out and still dealing with a bunch of models in our heads. So I think we are on that. Like we totally believe that we need centralization. We just believe that right now there's a bunch of centralized processes that can be decentralized, including organizations. But it also depends on what kind of organization we're talking about and what kind of purpose and processes will exist within it.
Well, I mean, we don't have that much time left. I feel like I've heard a lot about things that we would like to hear, but I'm sort of curious about particularly like in specific ideas that any of our panelists either are planning on running or would like other people to run or are on the, relatively near-term roadmap.
What was that last part?
Near-term roadmap?
Yeah.
I'm from Texas. I might be hard to understand.
Yeehaw. For us, we think about the evolution of work more than just the future of work. We think about how do we get from where we are to where we want to go. So as an example, part of the Opolis stack is actually a trustee that is a vertically integrated shared services stack, and it's highly centralized. It's just more efficient, and its relationship with the consumers is just different. In the employment world, corporations own the employees, right? There's a lot of legislative and compliance-based, onerous requirements of people who want to employ people that you have to go through. And our trustee idea and the functionality of it is actually designed to, as we decentralize certain processes and we have the opportunity to kind of peel out certain components that make sense to either automate completely or just abstract them away, it actually allows us the bridge, or to think about it like the hand on the back of the bike, right? So we're not trying to go from this highly controlling thing to this Buck Rogers future thing like overnight. We think this is a process and it's going to take time. So the first thing that we did was we set up a PEO, which is fully centralized, but it's crypto friendly. And we're starting with baby steps to get people to use cryptocurrency or die. We've got our friends at Maker and Wire that we're integrating. Hi, guys. Into this process in collaboration to kind of really knit together this full, call it the procurement process of employment. So we're just taking things a step at a time. So we have this like centralized framework, and it's really boring and not that sexy, but it's functional and it works. And the way that we've set up the structure of it, it's not only benevolent, we're actually actively architecting a legal framework that's not going to be corruptible. Not just digital governance, but legal DNA that is going to create sustainability for the entire ecosystem of Opolis.
Well, we're on the Future of Work panel, but Gitcoin is live now and built off of the substrate of open source software, which is arguably an ecosystem of entirely decentralized software engineers that were already building the infrastructure, the digital infrastructure of the modern world. And so this may be a panel about the future of work, but the present of work in the blockchain space is that Gitcoin has done almost $1 million worth of payments for open source software developers that are pushing Ethereum 2.0 forward and pushing open source forward. So I think that we're starting to see the glimmers of the transfer to the information economy, and that means remote work, open source as a default, unbundling of work, and those trends starting to come to fruition. And to answer your question, Evan, our near-term roadmap is just to scale that up.
Great. Maybe I'll start with the present and go to the future as well. So you can read more about what we're up to, and we've been working with Opolis as well in this uncorruptible corporate form at purpose.ag/book. That is kind of where we're documenting what we think are some of the corporate ownership forms for the future that actually serve these network-based organizations and that serve mission-driven companies. And I think that the thing I'm excited about for the future is network-based companies, protocol companies, these types of new organizations moving away from the classic venture capital model. I think that the implication of the finance on the governance activities and the behavior of these companies is not immediately apparent, but it's pernicious, and I think it's something that we need to deal with head on. So there's some great articles about like token redeemable equity and other ideas that are kind of paving the way for the future, and I think that this is one of the key things to get right in the ecosystem is what type of financing are we taking on, and what are the implications of those finance for the future.
I like to start with the past of work. I think it's there's a lot to be learned there. For instance, the kind of blockchain projects on this panel have a lot of, I think, interesting overlap with the history of guilds, and I like to mine those histories and explore lessons that can be applied to future models. And another that I'm looking at is a structure called an employee stock ownership plan that has been used for converting companies to employee ownership. I think there are a lot of major problems with it, but it is an example of a way that we could think about taking some of the big behemoth companies that are ruling our world right now and splinter them off into more accountable structures. And so I'm looking right now at how to apply some lessons from that history with some overlap with what Derek's involved in, and using trust structures and also tokenization strategies for building democracy into our companies. A few years ago, I was involved in an effort to where we had a shareholder proposal before Twitter's shareholders to explore avenues for user ownership, and it did better than we thought, but we still need the tools in order to do that, so that maybe someday, through our ownership of the great networks around us, we don't have to work as much.
So speaking for myself, I think that it's easy in this space to get in our heads a lot. And I would really love to see a future of work where we don't need to be like so much in our heads and using like complicated terms to talk about this stuff. And I think it's super important, if we're trying to build technology, we hold a massive responsibility in our hands. As I said in the beginning, a lot of people still don't know and don't understand what we're doing, and it can have a huge impact in many, many more lives. So one way that I see that responsibility being held accountable is, just a little part, which is experimentation, and that's part of our roadmap so far. Is just knowing that we we don't know what's going on. Like, it's a lot of complexity, and the best we can do is to put our product out there and try to experiment as much as possible with it, try to learn as much as possible from people that are using it, and stay humble, you know. Because, yeah, it's just a lot of unknowns, a lot of complexity, and we're just humans. We can't deal with all of this stuff.
Well, great. We are out of time, so let's have a round of applause for our panel.